unpopular opinion, I think.
Let's lead with that. I mean, what better way to lead something with? Let's lead
Yeah,
with the unpopular opinion.
unpopular opinion. I think love gets blown up into this whole thing that it's not, and this happens, I think, in most often in two ways. One, it's like this like very conditionalized thing that's between two or more people, and it's like this thing that we're like yearning for. Or love is everything, and everything is love, and it's rainbows and flowers. And I don't know that either of those are great perspectives. And so I think love is looking to come back to like that middle grounded perspective. And I'll say this, I think for most people in the world, when we think of love, or we think of being in a relationship where there is love, I think most often love is that idea that we have in our head of what this relationship is supposed to be. And not, like you said earlier, it's not that action between the people.
Right.
And so if it doesn't look like that thing we think it's supposed to be, then it's not right. There's something wrong about it. It's like we only want like the gushy parts, and it's like, no, it's the whole thing. And I think then to the other side of like everything is love, I think we then overlook anything that doesn't look like, if we're saying everything is love, but then it actually turns into, well, everything is love except for the stuff we don't want to look at. That gets set aside. That's not love. That's right. Anything that doesn't make me feel good is that, right? And so it's like, okay, so what is it really? What is the experience? How are we actually living this idea? What really is it? And so I think love is an idea that makes us feel good, and yet it's really hard to define. So I guess that's the unpopular opinion, is like we don't actually, there's not clarity of what it really is. Like what really is it?
Well, and I had a conversation recently, because I think, especially you and I, we're sometimes in rooms where this is talked about, like love is all there is, and showing up in love. And so, of course, I had to ask the question, what is love? Because it's the same sort of thing you're talking about. We use it in all these different contexts that sometimes it kind of like, what is it? And then it has no meaning behind it. And so there was not really, in my opinion, an answer that I was satisfied with. And so I just began to like sit with, the word, and then what I felt in my body when I said it or thought about it. And for me, I like even felt my body, I kind of leaned in like this, like not even realizing it. But I think that's what it is. It's this leaning in. Brene Brown says that people are hard to hate close up. And so I began to think, I think about that quote often. And I kind of thought about it in a different way. Like, yeah, when I can sit on the outside of a situation and be like, there's some messed up stuff there. Yeah. But then if I can lean in and understand the backstory of the person that may be in that situation, the things that have led up to how they're showing up, my own things that have led up to how I'm showing up and perceiving the situation, if I really lean into that, then I can begin to feel like, oh, like this, like compassion for like, yeah, if I had that life experience or that things, I probably would show up that way too. And like, oh, wait, I'm doing the same thing. And so I began to feel this compassion for the circumstance or the situation or the individuals that are involved in it. So I think that's a lot of what it is. And I think compassion is often spoken, it's different than love, but compassion has for me this activity, this like kind of getting dirty, even when
they're good friends.
Right. They're very good friends. Even though when we don't want to like look at all the things, there's something about compassion that kind of peels back the layers anyway. And so I think that for me is what love is. And I mean, how great is that to kind of like superimpose that into our idea of self-love? Yeah. My goodness, leaning into those things, because if I don't lean in, then I can't see the things, or I'm not going to address the things, and I can't appreciate them for what they are. Yeah. And so I think for me that love has that leaning in sort of motion to it.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting, at least for me, my experience has been I've gotten better. My experience has been it's been much easier to be compassionate for other people than it is for myself.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Right? And
Why is
so
that though? What is that? Why is that?
yeah,
If we
it's
could
like,
crack
well,
the code on that, man.
so I'll say that back in college, so I went to college for music, and so hours upon hours upon hours each week in the practice room, like by yourself, working on your craft. And there was like a culture of like almost like cursing yourself out when you messed up, like out loud. Like people would like
Mm,
get mad and like throw stuff. Like it was crazy at themselves. And I think some of it was this like, I need to make sure other people know I messed up so that they don't get on my, like if I know I messed up, then they're not going to get on my case. Like it was a weird like
that's interesting.
proving thing.
Yeah.
And but what happened was it developed, like I can look back. I mean, that practice developed this habit of like this inner self, like very critical inner self talk, inner self dialogue about things outside of music.
Mm,
And I've gotten to a point where most of the time I can look at things very like objectively about myself because I've worked at it. But there was a time where that like that criticism was very like I thought it was justified because I
yeah.
wasn't showing up the way I wanted to or thought I should or was expected to or whatever. Um, but yeah, it's a really weird thing. Like why are we so okay beating ourselves up when at the same time like I would never have said any of that to anybody else.
Right. Well, and it's interesting too, I think, because I think this idea of self-love also is good friends with authenticity, right? And so I think the
Yeah,
more that we can allow ourselves to show up authentically, then that becomes kind of like second nature. And so then,
yeah,
of course, if I am showing authentically, of course, I want that same experience for someone else. And so even that is love, right? Creating this container for us to show up that way. Often, I see when I've seen in the past where I've been most critical of myself and these really like super high expectations that like no one could attain.
nobody would. Yeah,
But then I would look in my relationships and I was doing the same thing. And it's like, what's behind that? And so, for me, behind that was, you know, thinking I need to show up a certain way, other people's expectations, other people's or frameworks of how I thought I should fit
mm,
in, or the boxes that I had been shoved in, and all of those sorts of things. And so, the more that I could look at those boxes, or those frameworks, or those systems, or those patterns of belief or thought that I had absorbed and chosen to live from,
yeah,
the more I could be like, "Oh, wow, yeah, that doesn't work," and that's really impacting not only myself but others. Just like we talk about the impact of self love, and
yeah,
so the more I can recognize those areas and allow myself just to relax and just to show up as is, the more that I can begin to hopefully do that externally as well. And I think that is the true impact of self love. That it is this
yeah, yeah.
me and we sort of
Right,
thing.
right. Yeah. I guess thinking about it a little more, right? Like that whole critical self talk for me stemmed from, I mean, and still does to an extent, is like, how dare you bring up those things that I don't like about me yet?
Yeah, there you go.
Right.
Yeah. Hmm.
I don't want to feel that. I don't want to acknowledge the things that I haven't acknowledged about me or don't want to acknowledge about myself. And so the self criticism is, well, I know better, or I should be different, or I can do better, or whatever it is, much higher expectations for me than are probably or were probably realistic. Right. And so I think that same thing happens not only with ourselves, but also out in the world. Right. Like we
Yeah.
get, you can get all hurt about like things that remind me of those parts I don't love about myself. And it's like, oh yeah, that says so much more about me than whoever was saying whatever it was or doing whatever it was they were doing, right? Which again goes back to the self-love. The more I'm willing to do the dive and pick apart the pieces and look at the stuff and like, oh, yeah, that's okay. Like it's okay to not you know, and in music school, it was like the expectation was to be perfect, right? Like, it's okay to not be perfect. Nobody's perfect. You're not going to be perfect. It's
Yeah.
never going to be perfect.
We don't
It's
need to let go of that,
yeah,
right? Because
yeah,
then we can let other people off the hook too.
right. Exactly,
And
exactly.
imagine if we could just do that. Really, honestly, let ourselves off the hook and everyone else too. Just
Yeah,
imagine like the shift that
yeah,
would happen.
and it introduces a whole new conversation where we can talk about things that aren't like we can bring up the things that aren't working or don't work for us or don't look like they're working or don't feel right. We can bring them up in conversation, and it's not about like, oh, you're wrong or not good enough. It's like, hey, let's just look at the thing in the relationship that's not what we
Working.
wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think this month is going to continue to be pretty enlightening, and it's going to have some depth to it.
Well, yeah, especially as we begin to like take this commonly used word and really kind of dive a little bit deeper and extract all the juicy goodness from it.
That's right. That's right.
So thanks so much for joining us for Truth Be Told 2.0. Hope that you have, like, this has just wetted your whistle for this conversation about love and starting with ourselves and how the more we practice self love and showing up authentically, the more that we can impact the world around us because we can invite everyone else to do the same and create spaces, places, and frameworks where that can actually be actualized. And one of those places, spaces, and frameworks is Soul Evolution Collaborative. And so if you would like to know a little bit more about us, you can check us out on our website, soulevolutioncollaborative.org. If you would like to dive in a little bit deeper on this conversation, please join us Thursday for The Gathering. It's our small group experience where we talk a little bit more about the topics for the week from our own experiences and learn and live together through those experiences. Of course, we have social engaged conversations on Friday. You can also find more information about that on our website. And there are so many exciting events coming up. And so hop on over, check it out. And if we don't see you back here on Thursday, we will definitely see you next week for Truth Be Told 2.0.